So it's safe to say the Star Trek franchise has taken a turn for the worst in recent years. It's become a little bit of a laughingstock amongst its fanbase, with the release of the Star Trek Kelvin movies, Star Trek Discovery, and subsequent short treks, Lower Decks, Star Trek Prodigy, and the upcoming Strange New Worlds. It's seeming more and more that the showrunners are more interested in quantity over quality. Now, when I saw the original trailer for Star Trek Picard, I was cautiously optimistic, or foolishly optimistic. I remember thinking, well, this is much better. This is where we need to be going. Back to form. This is where I want the Star Trek franchise to go. There's been far too many prequels of late. Let's get this franchise moving forward. Oh boy, how wrong we were. This is not where I expected it to go. Now, Star Trek Picard, turns out, was a much bigger disappointment than I expected. It had characters that I was already familiar with and absolutely loved, and it just destroyed them, made them less than what they were before. Dark, twisted parodies of themselves, where their personal lives have become mostly just downright depressing, and even making the main character of the entire franchise, the Federation, a bleak, dire, suspicious, easy to infiltrate, xenophobic hotbed of bullshit. It made the titular character something of a spare part in his own show. Now, the trailer really did do what it was supposed to do, and it pulled me in and gave me a little bit of hope that Star Trek was savable. So when the first episode was released, I sat there eagerly awaiting to see the return of great characters. Certainly Picard, who was pretty much my favourite captain. I'd idolised him in the past. He was someone who taught me to approach every situation with a degree of diplomacy and patience. Instead, I got treated to seeing my favourite captain, a well-respected, well-written, well-rounded character, reduced to a mere decrepit, bumbling, weak, feeble old man, devoid of any hope, devoid of any motivation, an angry, bitter, cynical shadow of what came before. Ultimately, the hype surrounding Star Trek Picard was all about the nostalgia, almost certainly to draw in wider Star Trek fans. Unfortunately, that's as far as Star Trek Picard goes. It's a nostalgia trip, and a bad one at that. It's got absolutely no substance. It's got nothing inspiring, no decent story to tell, characters that are one-dimensional, uninteresting, and quite frankly, it tells a story that has been told time and time again, and much better. I mean, it became clear after a few episodes that the writers had no idea what Star Trek was, and didn't really appreciate it and care about what the fans wanted, just as long as they got paid. But they're the first to tell you don't know what Star Trek is. Absolute fucking morons. The show's absolutely riddled with little member berries, images of the Enterprise D, Picard's personal exhibit with the Captain Picard Day sign, and it's literally that they went into the memory vault of Star Trek and randomly picked out items that they could just throw in, just to say, hey, remember this? They introduced characters that couldn't really give two shits about, generally because they're one-dimensional and boring. They've got absolutely no redeeming qualities. And by the final episode, I was truly devastated with what they'd done to this once great franchise. And at one point, I was hoping that the entire crew would just be killed off, so I wouldn't have to see their pasty faces again. Now, they've got some returning characters from the Next Generation, and some from different Star Trek shows as well. We see the return of 7 of 9. Oh, by the way, she's gay now. Where did that come from? Not to mention a depressed, nihilistic, liquor-drinking hard-ass. So far removed from what she was in Star Trek Voyager, I barely recognised her. Now, you also have the return of Icheb from Voyager, who is literally in one scene in the entire season. He's viciously tortured and has his eyeball removed, just before 7 of 9 has to euthanize him, in an unnecessarily gore-infested Game of Thrones style scene that really has no place in Star Trek. I guess I'm not showing my kids this version of Star Trek. We have the return of Will Riker, who's the only original character who is pretty much the same as how we left him, and pretty much the only reason I smiled throughout the latter episodes. Marina Sirtis returns as Deanna Troi, and she gets a couple of really good opportunities to put Picard in his place where he belongs, reminding him not to overstep his bounds. We can't have that, can we? We have the return of Hugh, once again played by Jonathan Del Arco, although his time is pretty short in this. Now, Brent Spiner returns as Commander Data, the android that Picard was in love with throughout pretty much the entire series of The Next Generation. What? Well, hold on a minute. You didn't get the memo on that one? Yeah, Picard and Data were clearly in love. Picard loves Data. Or at least that's what this show's trying to say. And if you don't like it, you can't be a true Star Trek fan. Now, later in the season, Brent also plays the son of Dr. Noonien Soong, the biological, living, breathing son of Dr. Noonien Soong, even though Dr. Noonien Soong, Data and Law's creator, never had children. It's just one of the many retcons in this show. Ultimately, the butchering of the Star Trek canon is pretty much the worst aspect of the show. It pretty much ruins years of well-written stories and a well-established canon in a very well-structured universe. Now, there are hundreds of videos on YouTube, and I highly recommend you check them out, showing just how much it butchered the canon and the franchise, so feel free to go see them for yourselves. There's some absolutely great ones. This was the last chance for Star Trek to regain some of its former glory. But it ended up being a big letdown and a cheap way to cash in on a character that the creators and writers could not give two shits about. And it's much the same way for the rest of the nutrek in this franchise. It's very disappointing. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. And I'll see you in the next video.
Done and said, as I fall back to my shelter, I know I